Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Simon, and in this video I'm going to cover the Unix Administration grade lab called File Systems and Dis. This is a lab that's already past due, so you should have submitted this already and attempted it yourself, but if you haven't, make sure you go through the practice lab and the grade lab on your own first, and then if you're struggling with it, come back to this video, because this video is meant to really help you prepare for your test, and it's going to show you how to go through this grade lab and basically do what you need to do to get 100% on this, but more so understand what you need to do. And that's all I want to do, is make sure that you can prepare for your test coming up and do really well on that test. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. But with that said, let's get into it. Let's start with part A, which is importing a fresh copy of the W01 and S01 virtual machines. Just make sure when you do, you don't boot S01 just yet, because part B requires us to basically add 3 virtual disks to it, which we have to do in VirtualBox. So let's get fresh copies of W01 and S01 right now. Go into VirtualBox. If you have W1 and S01 already, just right click them and remove them, because we want fresh copies. We don't want copies from a previous lab. We'll click delete all files, and when they're both gone, go to File, Import Appliance, and find your OVA file that you downloaded at the beginning of the term. So mine's right here. I'll click next and then adjust the settings to whatever you like. What I do is I just adjust the W01 virtual machine settings. I change CPU from 1 to 2 and the RAM from 1024 to 2048, and that's it. When you're happy with your settings, click import and wait. A lot of students will say, why are we learning this? What is this really about? Why are we doing all this? And the reason why we're doing this is, unlike Windows, where a lot of things are plug and play, when you add a virtual disk to a Linux system in VirtualBox, you can't just use it. You have to actually partition it, and then on top of partitioning, you have to give it a file system that it can use, so it knows how to create files onto this storage space. And then on top of that, once you create the file system after partitioning, then you have to mount it so Linux can actually use it. So it's kind of a 3-step process that takes a bit, but that's essentially what we're doing. You're learning how to do this. The good thing is, James Long, who created all of these labs, made it very simple. He basically shows you command for command what you have to do. Your tests are open book tests, so you can go back to this and just look at this, and it's really not bad. It's a lot of work, but it's not heavy in terms of material you have to memorize. You don't have to memorize anything, you just have to know how to find this information on the actual practice lab. So let's get into the part B section of the grade lab, because we got our machines ready here. You can start W01 if you want, but just don't start S01 yet, because S01 we have to work with first in VirtualBox. So click on S01. You can minimize W01 because we don't need it for a bit, but click on S01 and click settings. Now that you're here, what you're going to do is click on storage, and you'll see it says SATA controller right here. We're going to click on the icon over on the very right. So make sure you click on controller SATA and then click on this icon right here, and we're going to say create new disk. And we're doing this because in part B it says we need to add 3 2GB virtual disks to the SATA controller on S01. So VDI is fine, so you can hit next, and dynamically allocated is fine as well. You can click next. What you're going to do is just name it something. So name it something like virtual disk 01. And make sure you change its space from 8 gigs to 2 and hit create. And that worked. So let's do it again. We're going to make sure controller SATA is clicked. We're going to click on this little hard disk image here. Click on create new disk. Leave it as VDI. Leave it as dynamically allocated. And then just change the name to something that you can remember. So virtual disk 02 for me. Change the space from 8 to 2 gigs and click create. And I'll do it one more time. And there we go. We have all 3 virtual disk images. They're all 2 GB and they're ready to go. So when you are good to go, you can click OK and start S01. And it'll take a couple of seconds to boot up, but that's all you had to do for this first section of part B. So now we're on the second section, which is boot it, and then check that the disks now appear as SDB, SDC, and SDD. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but basically to find out how to check if they're there, if you went into your practice lab and you scroll down, you'll see that this is the command that we're going to type. ll/dev/sd star. It allows us to check the new disks that we have in our OS. Okay, so here we go. Here's SO1. I'm going to log in. And then I'm going to type in that command, ll/dev sd and then star or asterisk, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to see a lot of information here, but we can see right here we have SDB, we have SDC, and SDD. So that's really good. But you might say, why do we have SDA? Remember that when you imported the OVA, it already had an image, right? It's already got this minimum core install loaded, and that was put on its first virtual disk image. So SDA is really the first virtual disk image that you have. So SDA is the first, B is the second, C is the third, D is the fourth. And we can see SDA is already partitioned because it's got a 1 and a 2. So it looks like there's 2 partitions to the first virtual disk. So what we have to do is we're going to have to eventually partition SDB, SDC, and SDD so that we can make use of them. So we checked they're there, so that's really good. So the next thing says we have to partition the disk with fdisk. So we have a bit of information here that we need to use. Basically, SDB is going to have 2 partitions, 1 and 2. The first one is going to have 500 megabytes, and the second one is going to have 1500 megabytes. So it's basically 25% of the 2 gigs and 75% of the 2 gigs. And then we're going to call it type 83, which you don't really need to know, but I'm going to show you where we're going to be putting that in. SDC and SDD are just 1 partition each, so they're easy. It's 2 gigs, they're getting all the space, and their type is going to be 8E. So let's do SDC and SDD first because that's probably the easiest to do. We don't have to split it up into 2 partitions, but you're going to see it's very, very easy. And if you want to know how to do it, once again, the actual practice lab shows you exactly what you need to do. You're going to type in this command, fdisk, dev, sd, and then whatever the letter is. So the first one I'm going to do is C, so I'm going to put SDC. Then we're going to type the command N, enter, type P, enter, 1, enter. We're going to say 1 again, enter, 261, enter, then T, enter, then instead of 83, it wants 8E. So we're going to say 8E because this is where we're going to be putting in our type. And then W for write. And that's it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So let's just clear. Let's say fdisk dev sdc because I'm going to start with C, not B. We get all this information. We don't really need to read it, to be honest with you, but you can if you want. All we need to know is the next thing we're going to type in is N, enter. Now it's going to say, what do you want to do? We want a primary partition, so we're going to say P. It's going to say what partition number. We only need 1 for C, so we're just going to say 1. And it's going to say first cylinder. Now what that means is where do you want to start on this hard disk? So the first cylinder is the very beginning, and 261 is basically the very end. That's the way that I would look at it for now, and it makes it easier. So the first cylinder is 1, and that's where we want to start because we want the whole thing. So start at 1. So we'll hit 1, enter, and then it's going to say the last cylinder. So where do you want to end? And we want the whole thing. So you can see it's cylinders 1 to 261. So 261 is the last one. So that's what we want, 261. That way we know we're using the whole thing up, 1 to 261. So hit enter, and now it's saying, okay, what else do you want to do? And we're going to say, let's basically determine its type. So we're going to say T. It's going to say, what's the hex code? Now here it says 83, but like I said, we actually want to use 8E. We will for SDB, we're going to use 83, but for here it wants us to use 8E. So we're going to say 8E, hit enter, and then say W to write. And there we go. we just partitioned SDC. So let's do it again so that you can see how it works for SDD, but it's going to be the exact same thing. fdisk dev SDD, get all this information, that's fine. We're going to say n, because remember right here it says n. Then it wants us to say p, so we're going to say p for partition. Now for SDD, remember we're only going to have one partition and we're going to use all the space, so we're going to say 1. Now it wants the first cylinder, so once again after we said 1, we're going to say 1 again. We're going to say we're going to use all of it. We're going to use cylinders 1 to 261. So the first cylinder is going to be 1 and the last cylinder is going to be 261. Now it's going to say what do you want to do now, and we're going to define its type. So we're going to say T, and we're going to say 8E, and then W to write. And that's it. So it's really, really easy. Again, even if you don't memorize it, you just have to see this guy here on your test and follow that. So now we're going to say clear, and let's do SDB now. Now SDB is a little bit different because we have 2 partitions. So there's a little bit of figuring out that we have to do. So the first thing is we're not going to use cylinders 1 to 261 because the first partition only wants 500 megs. So we don't need to use 1 to 261. We need 25% of cylinders allocated to partition 1. So you might need to get your calculator out. Type in 261 and then times that by 0.25. And we can see it's 65.25. So it's up to you. You can say 65 or you can say 66, but basically I'm going to go with 66 just in case. So let's start by doing what you know already, which is fdisk dev SDB. We get all that message again. We're going to say n like normal. We're going to say p. Now it's going to say which partition do we want. Now we have 2 partitions, but we're going to select the first one. So we're going to say 1 again. And it's going to say what cylinder do you want to start with. So let's start with the very first one. That's fine. But then it's going to say, okay, what's the last cylinder? Well, we can't use 261 because that's going to take all the storage space up. So what we're going to do is look at this number and you're going to decide 65 or 66, but whatever it is, that's going to give us basically 500 gigs or 500 megabytes of the 2 gigs, or you can look at it as 25% of the storage. So I'm going to say 66. Now we can do the type as we normally do. So T, and it's going to say what do you want to do, what's the hex code, and we're going to say 83 this time. And right. So that didn't seem too hard, but we have to do it again because there's another partition we still have to basically partition. So let's clear and let's do this all again. fdisk dev SDB. Now we get a bit of a different warning. Don't worry, that's normal. Just hit N again, hit P again. Now it's going to say what partition number do you want. This time we're going to say 2. And you'll see, first cylinder, it tells us it starts at 67 because 1 to 66 is already taken. So 67 is fine. Hit 67. And then it says last cylinder, well, we want the rest of it. So just put in 261 because that's the rest of it. Hit enter. And now you're good. Now we can set the type. But watch this. When you say T and you hit enter, now you have to decide for which partition. Because there's already partition 1 and now there's a partition 2. So it's going to ask you which partition are you looking for now. And we want to make sure we're changing the partition number 2. And put in the hex code, which is 83. Type W, and there you go. You just wrote it, and now all of these disks are partitioned. So that's really good. And as you can see here, if you want to check to make sure that everything is good, you can type in fdisk-L and then each of the disks just to make sure that they're working. So we'll do that just to show you what it looks like. So we're going to say fdisk-L for list, and then type in dev, and we'll say SDB. Okay. We get this message and it basically shows us there is basically 2 partitions. The first one starts at 1 and ends at 66. The The second one starts at 67 and ends at 261. So that's really good, and we see the ID or the type is 83. So everything was great. That's exactly what we want. So let's clear. Let's do the same thing for SDC. In this case, we only have one partition, and it starts at 1 and ends at 261, and the ID is 8E, so that's exactly what we want as well. And we'll do it for DD as well, and you can see same thing. Only one partition. It starts at 1, ends at 261, and it has an ID of 8E. So good job. We just completed part B. Seemed like a lot of work, but I was explaining it to you. If I didn't explain it to you and I just did it, you'll see it actually is pretty quick to complete. So let's scroll down and start working with part C. So now that we've got these ready for partitioning, we have to basically give them a file system, and then we have to mount it. So even though we partitioned it, Linux has no idea how to write files to this storage device at all. You have to give it a file system that it can associate with before it knows how to write anything. And then once you do that, you have to mount it. So there's three things that we have to do, and I'm going to show you how to do them. So right here, the first thing is you want to basically make a file system for them. Okay, so you're going to make that file system, and then you're going to make a mounting point. So you're going to make a directory, and once you make that directory, you're going to mount the partition to that directory so it knows where to use it. We're going to do that, but we're also going to do this down here, which is basically to make it mount automatically every time we boot. So there's a file called etc/fstab, and you're going to see it has a bunch of entries, and we're going to want to make sure that we add an entry for every single one of our devices. But in this case, we're only going to be working with SDB1 and SDB2 because that's what it wants us to use just for this part. So you'll see how that's done. But basically, if you think about it, we've got three things that we have to do, so let's start doing them. So very first thing, let's make the file system. So we're going to say make file system, we're going to say type, and then the extension. So the very first one will be extension 3, the second one will be extension 4, and then you're just going to name the partition. So let's do that. So make file system T extension 3 dev SDB1. And that's all good. So let's do it one more time. Now we're going to do 2, but it's going to be extension 4. And there we go. So the reason why I used extension 3 and extension 4 is that it was given to us. So on your test, it'll be told what you're going to write in. So don't worry about figuring out which one you should use. It's just going to be told to you. Okay? So we got that file system all created, which is great. So we have to move on to the next part, which is making the directory so that we can mount it. So let's make the directories, and we can see that the mounting points are going to be departments/sales and marketing. So let's make those. Perfect, but we have to mount them. So even though we've created them, they're not mounted yet. So this is the next part right here. We're going to mount, once again, the type, and we're going to put the extension of whatever they want us to use. Then you're going to put in the partition and then the mounting point. So it's pretty easy. Again, you don't even have to memorize this, just know where to look for it on your actual practice exam, or your practice lab, sorry. So the first one is extension 3, because that is SDB1, and the mounting point is going to be departments sales. And then the next one will be marketing, which is SDB2. And extension is going to be 4. There we go. So we just did that. So that is really, really good. We got the mounting point. They're all mounted. If you want to see how we know they're mounted, you can say DF and hit enter. And we will see a bunch of stuff that's basically mounted. And we can see we have these two guys mounted right here. But it's not mounted all the time, unfortunately. We have to make sure that the file systems must be mounted automatically every time the system boots. So that means that we have to edit a file called etc/fstab, which I showed you down here. So you're going to want to say vi etc/fstab, and you're going to go into this file and you're going to see a bunch of entries already. So we're just going to add an entry at the bottom for each of them. You're going to hit I, enter, and you're going to say dev SDB1, and he is located at departments sales. Here we're going to put the extension that we used, so we used 3. We can say defaults right here, and then type in 0 and 2. The numbers are just basically checks. You don't really need to know them. Basically they'll tell you what to type in, but don't worry about the numbers for this course. I don't think you'll ever need to worry about them. You're either going to use 02 or 00, but it'll typically be given to you. So the next one is dev SDB2, and that was located at departments marketing. That's the mounting point. They used extension 4. Once again, defaults and 02. Just so you know, you don't have to have them perfectly lined up. As long as you have a space between them, it'll figure it out. So it doesn't have to be nice and neat, but I like to have it nice and neat. So I'm going to do that. But just in case you don't worry. Sometimes you'll find that the mounting point is a really long name and it's just not going to fit and make everything look nice. So don't worry about that. But if you can get away with it, try to make it look neat. It just doesn't really matter at the end. So once you're good, just save it. So :WQ, and you're done. Now, if you boot this machine, it's going to automatically boot these partitions so that you can use them. So we are done with part C. So it wasn't really hard. It's not too bad, especially if you've gone through it once or twice. You'll find that it gets easier and easier as you do it. So here's the next part. Part D, logical volumes. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going to say, okay, we have partition C and D, and both of them are 2 gigs, but I really need one big drive, like one that is basically like 4 gigs. So what can we do to basically merge these 2 partitions? So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to basically merge these partitions so that they're just one big logical volume, and it's going to use both these partitions, but it's going to act like it's one. So that is what we're doing here, in case you were wondering. But this one as well is basically in the practice lab. You just have to basically find it, and it's right here. Add a disk. We're using logical volumes, and you're going to be able to skip this part because we've already done it. We're going to actually just start down here, and we're going to say PV create and start putting everything through. So let's start and see what they want us to do. It says initialize SDC1 and SDD1 for use with LVM using PV create, which is this guy right here. So we have to initialize both of them first. So let's do that. Clear PV create, and we're going to say dev SDC. And remember, you have to put 1 this time because we have to make sure we know which partition we're using. Even though there's only 1, you have to put this in. And it says successfully created. Good. And we'll do that for D as well. Okay, perfect. So we've initialized them. So now it says create a volume group named VG01 containing just dev SDC1 using VG create. So we're not going to worry about SDD1, we're only going to worry about SDC1 for now. So this is the part we're going to work on. We're going to say VG create, and then it wants us to name it, and it wants us to name it as VG01, and then you're going to put dev SDC1. So let's do that. VG create VG01 dev SDC1. Okay, and that should be exactly what they want. Okay, so that was created successfully. Now it says add dev SDD1 to VG01 with VG extend. It says yes, we could have passed both devices to VG create, but we want to introduce you to VG extend. So basically, what you would have done right here, which is VG create for SDD, we're now just going to do VG extend. So it's the exact same thing that we just did, except instead of calling it VG create, we're using VG extend, because remember, the idea is we want this logical volume to be 4 gigs. So we're just going to extend what we already created right here with VG01 so that it uses SDD1 as well, so we can use all of the storage on both devices as one device. So it's not in here, just so you know, but basically this VG extend is going to be used the exact same way that you use this command. The only difference is that you're going to change VG_create to VG_extend. Change this to VG01 because that's the name of the logical volume we're creating, and you're going to use SDD1 here. So that's what I'm going to do right now. VG_extend VG01 dev SDD1, and that was successful. So that's really good. So now it says check your work with VG display-V, and we can do that. We can say VG display-V, and we get a lot of information that doesn't really, you're probably not going to memorize this stuff, but all you should know is that you probably did it right. So we'll go down here now. It says now create 3 logical volumes in VG01, build file systems on them, and make sure they mount at boot time. So here's all the information that we have. Okay, so let's do this. If we go here, this is where we're going to start. So we're going to say lv create -l, which means basically use a system that we're aware of for numbers, for like basically deciding, for example, the first thing is 200 megabytes. We're going to say 2M, capital M, so it knows, or sorry, 200M, so it knows it's going to be 200 megabytes. That's what the big L stands for. Then you're going to say -n, and then we're going to say, instead of catering, we're going to say LVOL0, and then instead of VG share, we're going to say VG01. So let's do it together, and you'll see it's pretty easy. So we're going to say lv create -big L, and we're going to say 200M because they want 200 megabytes. Then we're going to say -n. Now we're going to say the name of it, which is lvol1. I believe that's what they wanted. No, lvol0. And then VG share, that's what we called it up here, but for us we called it VG01, so we're going to say VG01. Okay, so that was created, so that was really good. So let's do it again, but now I'm going to say lvol1 because that's what this guy is, but it's still 200 megabytes. Perfect. And now it says all remaining space. So how we're going to do that, and you can use the man command. You can say man lv create if you want, so you can see how it works. But basically what we're going to do is this. We're going to say lv create -l, and then we're going to say 100% free n lvol2 vg01. So what that does is the small l says don't look at actual numbers, look at basically percentages, and we can say 100% free. So everything that's free, put into lvol2 from vg01, and if we hit enter, it created perfectly. So that is how we do this one. Now we're not completely done because we still have to build the file systems and make sure they mount every single time. So there's still more to do, and that's where we are going to go down here to 8 and do what you're probably familiar with already, which is make the file system, put the type in, whatever the extension is, which they give to you. All of them are going to be 4. And then you're going to put in right here dev / in this case VG01 / and then whatever the L volume is. So we're going to say it's going to be for the first one lvol0, the second one lvol1, and the third one is lvol2. So let's do that together right now. We are going to say make file system type extension 4 because they're all 4 this time, so it makes it easy. And then you're going to say dev VG01 lvol0. Okay, so it does everything looks good. If you're wondering how I figured this out, the dev VG01 lvol0, when you're doing the practice lab you can kind of see it. You're going to put dev, and then the VG share is what they kept using, but for VG share in our lab we actually called it VG01. So VG01 is basically what VGA share is here. On your test, it'll tell you what to type in. It might be VGO1, it might be something very different, but just understand that whenever you see on the practice lab it says VG share, on the grade lab they're changing VG share to call VGO1. And then you're going to have the / catering, and catering is basically LVOL0. That's the name. So that's why they kept on using catering, but we're going to use LVOL0 because catering is the name, but on this lab the name is this. So I know it's confusing. Some people find it very, very confusing, but trust me, that's just it. You just have to say make file system -t extension for dev and then the VGO1 LVOL0, and that's what you have to do. All right, so let's clear. Let's do it one more time with LVOL1, and then one final time with 2. All right, so now we have a file system, but we still have to make sure that they mount. So we're just going to go down here. Once again, we're going to make a mounting point, so a directory, and then we're going to add it to the fstab, and then I'm going to show you how to mount them. So this is kind of neat. So let's make these mounting points first. So you should know how to do that. Make directory p departments catering, accounting, and IT. Okay, so that's really good. So we can move on to the next step. The next step, which is adding it to fstab. So let's do that. We're going to say vi etc fstab. I think it might be fs tab, but I always call it fstab. Alright, so this is going to be familiar to you because we did something in here already, but now what we're going to do is we're going to make a new entry, and it's going to be dev, it's going to be VGO1, and that's going to be LVOL0, and we're going to make sure that it goes to departments, and this one was catering, extension 4, defaults, and 02. And just to confirm, LVOL0 is for catering, and we're using extension 4, so we're on the right track. And we're going to say dev VGO1 LVOL1 departments accounting extension 4 defaults 02, and one more VGO1 LVOL2 departments IT extension 4 defaults 02. Remember, you don't need to worry about what these numbers are. They're just basically system checks when it boots everything up. It looks in a dump and all this kind of stuff, so don't worry about it. Again, defaults, don't worry about. Extension 4 were given, and this is pretty much all you need to put in. So just, again, don't worry too much about it, and also don't worry if it's lined up properly. Just make sure that there's spaces in between where there has to be spaces. Escape, save it by saying :WQ, and they're good to go. But watch this. If I say DF, where I can check what's been loaded, see how I only have sales and marketing? That's because I haven't mounted anything yet. I've only mounted sales and marketing. Even though I made mounting points for these guys, I haven't actually mounted them yet. So one way to do it, where you can mount everything all at once, is you can just say mount-a, and it'll take everything in that etc/fstab or fstab file, and it mounts it automatically if it's not mounted currently. So watch, if I hit A, or enter, sorry, and then I hit DF, they're all there now. So now they're all mounted, and that's exactly what we wanted. So now that they're all mounted, it basically says making mounts safer. So what it says is, let's change dev SDB1 to a UUID specification in fstab. So it wants us to unmount SDB1. Okay, so let's say U mount. It's not unmount, by the way, it's U mount. I don't know why, it kills me too. Dev SDB1. Okay, so we have now unmounted that. So if we say df, you'll see that sales is no longer here. So that's exactly what we wanted. Then it's going to say find the UUID of SDB1. Okay, so we're going to find it. We're going to say BLKID dev SDB1. So we get this really long, this really long ID. Okay, and you're gonna have to basically write this down. What I'm gonna do is just take a snapshot of it because you're gonna need it later. Okay, cool. So I have that. So now what it wants us to do is let's clear this, and it wants us to modify the fstab or the fs tab and change dev SDB1 line to look like this. Basically, we're going to put the UUID in there. That way, it's basically hard for people to see what this is. No one's going to know what this is just by looking at it. It's a little bit easy to see this in fstab and know exactly what it's talking about, but using this isn't as easy to figure out. So I guess that's why they're teaching you to do it. So let's do it. I'm going to say vi etc let's modify its SDB1. So what we're going to do is erase this, put UUID equals, let me grab this, and I'm going to write it basically character for character. F8A913-8D 2D43-4D 56 BD6A B110F2E FF1F9. I hope I got that right. That's crazy. Okay, so see what I was saying is that you don't have to have these all lined up perfectly. You just have to make sure that there's a space in between each of them. That way you know. That way the system knows that the first line is basically the mounting partition that we're going to do. The second part of this after the space will be the mounting point. Then the next part is the extension, then the default. It doesn't have to look pretty, just make sure there's a space in between them. But if you do something like this, that's going to happen. So that is normal, that's okay. Let's see if it actually works. Let's see if I got it right. So we're going to say right, let's clear. Once again, let's make sure it's not already there. I don't see sales here, so let's go and say mount A. I didn't get any errors, so that's probably a good thing. So let's go here to df, and look at that. Sales is here, and thankfully it shows us the partition that we're using, which is great. So we did everything properly. Now it says check your work by remounting it and then do the graded script. So we can do that now. And I'll show you what it's supposed to look like, which is going to be a big mess. All right. So while we do this, I'm just going to reflect on this whole thing that we did, this lab. There's a lot to this. It kind of looks like it's small because it's giving us just information we have to put in, and it's not too bad. But if you notice, there's a lot to go through. But I promise you, if you go through this, like I said, once or twice, you're going to find that it becomes easy. And remember that your test is going to be, I think, an hour and a half long or 2 hours long. It's not long, so they're not going to have you do this whole thing for all these different discs and whatnot, because you don't have a lot of time. They want you to, you know, get tested on other things too. So don't worry on your test that you're going to have so many things to do with this. This might be one section, and it might just be like 2 discs, and it'll be very, very simple. But knowing how to do this is really, really important. And I will say, I'm pretty confident you're going to see this on your test in some capacity. Like I said, it's most likely not going to be massive, but knowing basically this guy showing you how to basically create the partition, knowing how to make a directory, making the file system for each of the partitions, mounting them and putting in the fstab is going to be really, really important. I'm almost going to guarantee that if you do see it, it's going to be based on this, the logical volumes. So it's just going to be your pv create, vg create, lv create, maybe vg extend, but again, look, it's all here. Just follow this to a T, and it's not going to be too bad. It's not going to be anywhere near as hard as it seems the first time. Doing it a couple times just to practice, you'll see, okay, this is easy to do. I understand. And the most important thing is really understanding where to put everything. When you see mount T extension 4, understanding that the next thing here is going to be the actual partition number and then the mounting point. If you can understand where you're putting everything in the commands, then it makes it so much easier, because I find that most students have the most difficulty trying to figure out where to place certain pieces of information in their command. So that's pretty much it though. Thanks for watching. I'm still going to show you really quickly how to get a perfect mark, which I've shown you, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. So in W01, we'll have to open the terminal, go into downloads, unzip that host file, then scp that host file, which is going to start with host sh, and we're going to go to root at 10.1.1.20, and you should know how to do this already because this isn't the first lab. I might have put the password in wrong. There we go. So now it's on SO1, so let's run it on SO1. So we're just going to say cd temp, we're going to /host, it runs. Now let's scp the SO1 report, go to root at 10.1.1.10 into the temp folder. Go back here, let's go to the temp folder and Firefox this guy up, and there we go. So we have a lot of information which is going to look very overwhelming, but basically what you're going to see is a host name. It's going to check that you ran this and did everything on SO1, which is perfect. So there's your 1 mark. Then you're going to see the fstab. It's going to be like, hey, let's see what your fstab looks like, and we're going to see what it looks like, and we're going to see that we did everything properly because we have our lvol 012, we have the UUID in here, and we also have SDB2, so everything is perfect. Then if you do the df-h, can't speak. I have a cold, by the way, so I apologize for my voice. It's just going to make sure that everything has been mounted, so we can see that everything's mounted. We have SDA, we have SDB2, SDB1 down here, and then the 3 logical volumes right there, so that's perfect. And then we have the VG display -v VG01, which is just basically showing you this guy was the 200 megabytes, this is 200 megabytes, this guy was the rest of it. So they're going to look at this and they're going to see, okay, this is exactly what we wanted from this lab. So that's how you get a perfect lab. That's how you do this. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm sorry that this one took so long, but this is one that will definitely be on your test. And like I said, my biggest advice is not even memorize it, just get used to doing the practice lab. Do the practice lab over and over until you kind of understand where to look for this stuff. So when you see something that says, hey, you have to do all of this, you're just like, oh, okay, get the practice lab. Find, there you go, LVM, and then just follow these steps, just replacing some of the information that it wants with what it actually needs. So that's pretty much it. Again, let me know if there's any questions, but until then, I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.